In the darkest recess of Sector 85Q, a pocket of the galaxy renowned for its endless paperwork and impossibly rigid protocols, the United Universal Biodiversity Alliance, UBA, prepared for another routine expedition. This mission was designated Operation Scaly Snatch, tasked with the capture and cataloguing of the enigmatic reptiles of planet 3471 Blue, Earth, as its diminutive sentient inhabitants called it. Chief xenobiologist Plunks Zipathor, a fuchsia-scaled, bioluminescent being with all the charisma of a wet sponge, took the lead. Plunks leaned back in his levitating ergonomic command pod, polishing his sixth ocular stalk with a disposable cleaning apparatus. Listen up, team. Earth reptiles are primitive throwbacks, basic instincts, no tech, no brains, no threat. This will be as simple as swiping crumbs off a dining slab. Yes, sir, chimed junior biologist Zap Philblort, a jittery three-eyed green biped whose job seemed to oscillate between doing actual science and ensuring Plonks didn't accidentally implode a sun. Zap fidgeted nervously with his data pad, but the archives mention something called Komodo dragons. They're quite large, aggressive, and, potentially venomous. Plonks waved an appendage dismissively. Venomous? Aggressive? That's propaganda from primitive carbon sacks who call themselves apex predators. Remember, Zap, intelligence is measured by bureaucracy. Have you ever seen a Komodo dragon file a form in triplicate? No? I rest my case. The ship's AI, Sark AI Asim 3000, chimed in, its voice a sultry mix of exasperation and deadpan humor. Reminder, Komodo dragons have been observed hunting in coordinated packs, exhibiting strategic ambush techniques, and eating things far larger and more important than you. Thank you, Sark, Plonk snapped. Your input is noted as always. File that under unsolicited commentary, the mission proceeded with the elegance of a hippo attempting ballet. The UBA's ship, the Taxonomic Triumph, descended to the Indonesian archipelago, deploying stealth fields so sophisticated they occasionally hid themselves from their own operators. The crew's landing gear sank knee-deep into a mangrove swamp, a feature Earth's locals would later describe as inhospitable, which Plonks confidently labeled adequately scenic. The capture drones were state-of-the-art marvels, equipped with quantum containment nets and self-assembling specimen pods. Deploy! Plonks barked as the first wave of drones zoomed out, glimmering like metal locusts. Target acquired, Zap announced, his voice a little too chipper. On the monitor, a Komodo dragon basked on a sunny rock. It flicked its forked tongue, lazily, emitting an aura of prehistoric indifference. Plonks laughed. Look at that simple creature. It's practically begging to be catalogued. The net fired, a lattice of glowing fibers encircling the Komodo dragon. The creature froze, then tilted its head, fixing its gaze on the drone. There was an eerie pause, like the moment before a storm shatters the tranquility. Chief? Zap squeaked. It's not struggling. It's overwhelmed by our superior technology, Plonks declared triumphantly. The Komodo dragon responded by lunging forward, ripping the drone from the sky with a crunch that sent sparks flying. The scene escalated like a toddler, discovering the joy of smashing a sandcastle. The Komodo dragon stomped the remnants, roaring with a sound that echoed across the swamp. From the underbrush, more Komodo dragons emerged, their reptilian eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and malice. They fanned out in a pattern no one would mistake for random. "Sir," Zap whispered, they're flanking us." Plonks blinked, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Nonsense. That's animalistic chaos. Everyone knows reptiles can't strategize." Sark AI Azam's voice dripped with glee. "Correction. Everyone but you." The Komodo dragons advanced in unnerving coordination. One swiped at a drone, another yanked a containment pod into the swamp, and a particularly daring reptile lunged at the ship's landing ramp. Within moments, the sleek Uber operation resembled a galactic yard sale. "Initiate emergency protocols!" Plonks shrieked, flailing at his console. He had spent so much time designing the manual capture process that the concept of retreat felt like an insult to his genius. The Komodo dragons, unburdened by any such ego, continued their assault. Zap barely dodged a tail swipe that could have flattened a hover scooter. Plonks, now desperate, activated a sonic deterrent beam. The dragons responded by tilting their heads, like they were trying to decide whether to mock him or eat him first. "They're learning," Zap whispered in horror. "They're adapting." Plonks slapped the control panel, sending the ship lurching upward, though not fast enough to prevent a Komodo dragon from latching onto the landing gear. The ship soared, leaving behind a scene of chaos, as the dragons watched with an almost smug satisfaction. As they reached orbit, Plonks slumped in his pod, his aura dimmed. We'll regroup," he muttered, trying to salvage his pride. SciFi chuckled. "Regroup? I'm rerouting our flight path to the Galactic Zoological Tribunal. Let's call this what it is. Catastrophic failure." Zap coughed. "Sir." One of them left teeth marks on the hypercore containment field. Plonks's sixth ocular stalk twitched. "Remind me to file a formal complaint against Earth Reptiles," SciFi sighed. "You'll have to wait your turn. The Komodo dragons seem to have already filed one." With their teeth, the taxonomic triumph limped through hyperspace, its hull marred by claw marks and patches of mud that had inexplicably survived atmospheric exit. The crew was silent, save for the occasional beep of malfunctioning systems and the soft groan of structural integrity. Alarms. Zap Philblort clung to his console as if it were a flotation device, his three eyes darting nervously between Plonks and the viewport. Plonks Zidpathor, for his part, was stewing in his command pod, a swirling vortex of bruised ego and denial. "We are professionals," he muttered, as though saying it enough times would erase the humiliating images of reptiles dismantling his drones like galactic piñatas. "Professionals who got pantsed by a bunch of prehistoric lizards," quipped SciFi, its tone practically oozing smugness. "Shall I prepare a formal apology to the Galactic Zoological Tribunal now, or wait for them to subpoena our black box?" "Recordings!" "Silent Sark," Plonks snapped, his bioluminescence flickering erratically. "This is a minor setback. The fault lies not in our methods, but in the unanticipated, hostility of the specimens. We simply need a revised strategy." Zap tentatively raised a hand, as though Plonks might bite. "Permission to speak, Chief?" Plonks waved an appendage, his irritation clear. Fine. What is it?" Zap hesitated. "I think we underestimated them. The Komodo dragons showed signs of cooperative hunting. That's not typical behavior for Earth reptiles. It's almost as if they were conspiring against us." Plonks interrupted with a derisive snort. "Please, Zap, don't anthropomorphize. The specimens, they're oversized garden lizards with delusions of grandeur. We'll outsmart them with a new plan." SciFi interjected, its voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ah, yes, because that went so well the first time." Plonks ignored the jab. "We'll use pheromonic bait. Earth's creatures are slaves to their instincts. We'll lure them into a controlled area, sedate them and transport them without incident. Simple, effective, foolproof." "Sir," Zap said cautiously, "are we sure we understand enough about their biology to—" "Zap, if you question my brilliance one more time, I'll demote you." "To plankton cataloging duty," Plonks snapped. "Now prepare the baiting drones. We're returning to Earth." The ship shuddered as its engines whirred back to life, pushing it through hyperspace toward the planet that had so thoroughly embarrassed them. Zap sighed and began inputting the coordinates, though his hands trembled slightly. When they re-entered Earth's atmosphere, the taxonomic triumph had upgraded its approach. Stealth fields were doubled, sensors recalibrated, and a small army of pheromonic drones equipped with sedation gas was deployed ahead of them. Plonks had also insisted on adding an emergency escape pod system that could eject him, and only him, at a moment's notice. The ship descended toward Komodo Island, its cloaking system shimmering like a soap bubble in the tropical air. Zappy monitored the drones as they spread across the terrain, each one releasing synthetic pheromones designed to mimic a Komodo dragon in distress. The plan was to lure the creatures into a designated capture zone where sedation gas would knock them out cold. "Status report?" Plonks demanded, his tone a mixture of nervousness and overconfidence. "The drones are in position," Zap said, scanning the monitors. "Pheromone dispersal at 85%. No sign of the specimens yet." "Excellent," Plonks said, leaning back in his pod. "This time we'll show those overgrown iguanas who's truly superior." The first signs of movement appeared on the monitors. A lone Komodo dragon emerged from the underbrush, sniffing the air suspiciously. It crept toward one of the drones, its tongue flicking out to taste the synthetic pheromones. Another dragon followed, then another, until a small group had gathered. Their muscular bodies tensed like coiled springs. "They're taking the bait," Zap said, a flicker of hope in his voice. Plonks grinned. "Of course they are. They're primitive animals, after all." The dragons advanced cautiously, their eyes scanning the area with unsettling focus. One of the larger specimens approached a drone and paused, tilting its head as though analyzing the device. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged, not at the drone, but at the small metal cylinder releasing the pheromones. The cylinder crunched under the dragon's powerful jaws, releasing a burst of pheromonic gas. The dragon reared back, snorted, and then turned to the others with what could only be described as a nod. Chief," Zap said, his voice trembling. "I think they know it's a trap." "Nonsense," Plonks barked. "Deploy the sedation gas." Zap hit the button, and a wave of pale blue mist began to spread through the capture zone. The Komodo dragons froze for a moment, then scattered, their movements coordinated and deliberate. One of them swiped at a drone, sending it spiraling into the trees. Another leapt onto a boulder, its eyes scanning the horizon like a military commander assessing the battlefield. "Why aren't they succumbing to the gas?" Plonks demanded, his frustration mounting. Sci-Fi HFY's voice chimed in with unhelpful cheer. "Perhaps because you underestimated their lung capacity and metabolic adaptations. Again." The dragons regrouped outside the perimeter of the gas cloud, their numbers growing as more emerged from the jungle. They began circling the capture zone, their movements eerily synchronized. "Sir," Zap said, his voice barely above a whisper, they're strategizing again." Plonks's bioluminescence flickered erratically. "Impossible! Reptiles can't strategize!" As if in response, one of the Komodo dragons let out a low growl. The others echoed the sound, their voices blending into a chilling chorus. Then, as one, they charged. The capture drones fired their containment nets, but the dragons evaded them with startling agility. One dragon leaped onto a drone, tearing it apart mid-air. Another swiped at the ground, ripping out a hidden pheromone dispenser and flinging it into the gas cloud. "Retreat!" Plonks shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Zap didn't need to be told twice. He activated the emergency recall sequence, pulling the remaining drones back to the ship. The dragons pursued, their massive bodies moving with a terrifying combination of speed and precision. The taxonomic triumph barely managed to lift off, its engines straining as the crew scrambled to escape. Below, the Komodo dragons watched the ship rise, their reptilian faces unreadable but somehow victorious. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, Plonks slumped in his pod, his pride in tatters. What just happened?" Sci-Fi HFY's voice crackled through the silence. What happened, Chief, is that you picked a fight with nature's most stubborn apex predator and lost. Twice. Zap glanced at Plonks, his face a mixture of terror and pity. What do we do now? Plonks groaned, covering his face with two appendages. We regroup. Again, and this time, we don't underestimate them. Sci-Fi HFY let out a dry laugh. Sure, Plonks, third time's the charm, right? The taxonomic triumph hovered in geostationary orbit above Earth, its battered hull an unflattering testament to the crew's repeated failures. Inside the ship, tensions were high. Plonks, Cobbleside Pathor, paced the command deck like a caged predator, his bioluminescent patterns flickering in erratic bursts that signaled deep frustration. Enough, he finally bellowed, his voice echoing through the ship. We are the apex. Species of this galaxy, pioneers of xenobiology, heralds of knowledge. And yet, we've been outmaneuvered by a bunch of oversized lizards. Technically, sir, Zap Fileblort piped up from his console, they're varanids, not lizards. Closer to monitor species. Silence, Zap! Plonks roared, his voice reaching, a pitch that rattled the nearest monitor. Your obsession with irrelevant details is part of the problem. We need solutions, not excuses. The ship's AI, Sci-Fi HFY, took this as its cue to interject with its usual sardonic flair. How about we try not poking the metaphorical dragon this time? Or literal dragon in this case. I've done some calculations and the odds of your survival drop precipitously every time you interact with them. Plonk shot the nearest speaker a glare that would have wilted vegetation. Your calculations lack vision. The problem isn't us. It's them. They're not behaving like ordinary creatures. There's something unnatural about their coordination. Zap hesitated, then cautiously voiced a thought he'd been nurturing since their last retreat. Sir, what if they're smarter than we've been led to believe? Evolution on Earth is unpredictable, and Komodo dragons might have adapted in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe even intelligence? Plonk stared at Zap as though he'd grown an extra head. Intelligence? Don't be absurd. Intelligence requires culture, language, bureaucracy, none of which these beasts possess. Sci-Fi HFY snorted, a feat it had mastered despite lacking a nose. Right, because they haven't already demonstrated strategic thinking, adaptive behavior, and a penchant for thoroughly embarrassing you. Plonks ignored the AI, turning instead to the ship's research module. If they're not intelligent, then there's a biological factor we've overlooked. We'll analyze their pheromones, their neurochemistry, their genetic structure. There must be something giving them this edge. Zap, prepare the molecular scanner. Yes, sir, Zap said, though his tone was less than enthusiastic. Within hours, the crew had cobbled together a new plan. This time, they wouldn't attempt to capture the dragons directly. Instead, they would collect environmental samples from Komodo Island, shed scales, saliva traces, even fecal matter, and use the ship's advanced labs to dissect the dragon's biology from a safe distance. The collection drones were deployed under the cover of night, their stealth systems engaged. Each one was programmed to retrieve samples without interacting with the dragons. Plonks watched the operation unfold from the command deck, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. See, he said smugly, this is what happens when you apply logic and restraint. No unnecessary risks, no dramatic confrontations, just science at its finest. Zap, monitoring the drones, bit his lip. Sir, I'm picking up movement near drone 7. Looks like 2 dragons. Plonks waved dismissively. Let them investigate. The drones are designed to be undetectable. As if to mock him, the monitor showed one of the dragons sniffing drone 7. It circled the device, its massive head tilting in a manner that could only be described as curious. Then with a sudden snap of its jaws, it bit down on the drone, crushing it like an aluminum can. Abort drone 7! Plonks barked. "Pull the others back immediately!" Zap's fingers flew across the console, but it was too late. The other drones, scattered across the island, were also being intercepted. Some were smashed, others dragged into dense underbrush. One drone even managed to transmit a final image of a dragon staring directly into its camera, its expression disturbingly knowing. "They're onto us again," Zap whispered. "It's like they were waiting for the drones." Plonks slammed his fist on the console. How? How could they possibly anticipate this? "They're animals!" Sark AI Asm, unable to resist, chimed in. "Animals who have now successfully dismantled every one of your plans. At this point, Plonks, I'm starting to root for them." Plonks ignored the jab, his mind racing. He couldn't afford another failure. His reputation, his career, his legacy, all were on the line. There had to be a way to outwit these creatures. "New plan," he said, his voice sharp with desperation. "We'll go down there ourselves. No drones, no intermediaries, just us and our technology. We'll collect the samples manually." "Sir," Zap said, his voice trembling, "with all due respect, that sounds like a terrible idea." "It's a brilliant idea," Plonks snapped. "If we go in person, we can adapt to any unexpected variables. Besides, we'll have personal shields and stun weapons. What could possibly go wrong?" Sark AI Asm let out a low, exasperated sigh. "Where do I even begin?" Despite Zap's protests and the AI's relentless snark, Plonks insisted on the mission. The three of them, Plonks, Zap, and a reluctant Sark housed in a portable unit, descended to the surface in a reinforced shuttle. The night air was thick with humidity and the sound of insects, creating an atmosphere that was both oppressive and ominous. The team moved cautiously through the underbrush, their personal shields glowing faintly. Plonks carried a molecular scanner, while Zap lugged a containment kit. Sark's portable unit floated behind them, occasionally muttering sarcastic remarks. "This is a terrible idea," Sark said for the 5th time. "Just thought I'd reiterate in case you forgot." "Noted," Plonks growled, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Now keep quiet and monitor the sensors." For a while, things seemed to go smoothly. The team collected a few scales, some saliva from a recently vacated nest, and even a fresh pile of feces that Plonks insisted on analyzing himself. But as they ventured deeper into the island, the sense of unease grew. "Sir," Zap whispered, "I think we're being watched." "Nonsense," Plonks said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Your imagination is running wild." Then, from the shadows, came a low, guttural growl. It was followed by another and another, until the air was thick with the sound. The team froze, their lights illuminating a circle of Komodo dragons emerging. From the darkness, their eyes glinted with eerie intelligence, their bodies moving with deliberate precision. "Don't panic," Plonk said, though his voice was shaking. "Activate your shields and prepare the stun weapons." Zap fumbled with his weapon as the dragons closed in. One of them let out a roar that sounded almost like a command, and the others began to spread out, cutting off the team's escape routes. "Chief," Zap whispered, his voice trembling, "I think we're in trouble." Plonk swallowed hard, his bioluminescence dimming. "Stay calm. We're the apex species here. We can outsmart them." Sark AI Asm let out a dry laugh. "Oh, Plonks, you sweet summer fool." The Komodo dragons tightened their circle, their massive bodies casting long, sinister shadows in the dim glow of the team's shields. Each step they took was deliberate, their claws crunching against the foliage as if taunting the intruders. Zap Filblort clutched his stun weapon with trembling hands, glancing nervously at Plonk's couple Zidpathor, who was frantically scanning. The dragons with his molecular analyzer. "They're just posturing," Plonks muttered, though the quaver in his voice betrayed his lack of confidence. "If we stay calm and maintain our shields, they'll lose interest." One of the dragons tested that theory by lunging forward and slamming into Plonks's shield. The protective field flared brightly, holding firm but flickering at the edges. Plonks stumbled back, his 6 ocular stalks swiveling in all directions. Posturing. Huh? Sci-Fi Asm's voice drawled from its portable unit, which hovered slightly higher than Plonks's head. I'm beginning to think these creatures missed the memo about our technological superiority. Quiet, Sark, Plonks snapped, struggling to regain his composure. This is just a tactical display of dominance, typical animal behavior. Another dragon lunged, this time at Zap, who barely managed to sidestep the attack. His shield flared as the dragon's claws raked against it, sending a ripple of energy across the protective barrier. Zap let out a panicked squeak and raised his stun weapon, firing wildly. The bolt of energy fizzled out harmlessly in the thick jungle air, striking nothing. "Sir," Zap whispered, his voice high-pitched with terror, "I don't think they're scared of us." "Of course they're not," Plonks shouted, his frustration bubbling over. "They're too primitive to understand the concept of fear. Now hold your ground," and he didn't finish the sentence. A third dragon struck, ramming its head against Plonks's shield with enough force to knock him off his feet. The molecular analyzer clattered to the ground, its screen flashing a string of error messages. The dragons paused, their movements synchronizing as they assessed the situation. One of them, a massive specimen with scars crisscrossing its hide, let out a low growl that seemed almost deliberate. The others responded with guttural sounds of their own, forming a chorus that echoed through the jungle. Sci-Fi Asm's voice cut through the tension. "Not to alarm you, but I believe they're communicating. You know, like a pack of predators coordinating their next move." "That's impossible," Plonk said, scrambling to his feet. "They're incapable of higher communication. It's time to run?" Zap interrupted, his eyes wide as saucers. Before Plonks could reply, the dragons charged as one, their massive forms moving with terrifying speed. The team broke into a sprint, stumbling through the dense underbrush as the dragons closed in. Their shields flared with each strike, but the creatures were relentless, attacking from all sides. "Back to the shuttle," Plonk shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "We can't let them surround us." The team stumbled into a clearing where the shuttle sat waiting, its engines idling in standby mode. Plonk smacked the control panel on his wrist, and the shuttle's boarding ramp lowered with an agonizing slowness. Behind them, the dragons burst into the clearing, their eyes gleaming with predatory focus. "Move! Move! Move!" Plonks yelled, shoving Zap forward as they scrambled up the ramp. Sci-Fi Asm's portable unit zipped ahead, its sensors scanning the pursuing dragons. The first dragon reached the ramp and slammed into it with enough force to make the entire shuttle shudder. Zap tripped and nearly dropped his containment. "Oh, Kit," but Plonks hauled him upright, dragging him into the cabin as the ramp began to rise. "They're trying to breach the shuttle." Zap gasped, his voice cracking. "What do we do?" Plonks's mind raced as he slammed the door controls, sealing the ramp just as one of the dragons lunged. Its claws raked against the metal, leaving deep gouges as the shuttle's engines roared. "To life! Lift off!" Plonks shouted at the autopilot, collapsing into a seat as the shuttle lurched upward. The dragons swarmed below, their roars echoing through the jungle. One of them leapt high enough to scrape the underside of the shuttle before falling back to the ground. As the shuttle broke through the canopy and soared into the sky, Plonks allowed himself a brief moment of relief. "We're safe," he said. Though his tone lacked conviction, Sci-Fi Asm's voice cut in, dripping with sarcasm. "Safe? Sure, if you consider barely escaping with your dignity intact. Safe? Let's not forget the damage to the shuttle, the loss of equipment, and the fact that you just antagonized Earth's most terrifying predators." Again. Plonks ignored, the AI turning to Zap. "What did we manage to collect?" Zap opened the containment kit, his hands shaking. Inside were a few samples, a fragment of shed scale, a small vial of saliva, and a single claw that had somehow embedded itself in the shuttle's hull during their escape. Not much, Zap admitted, his voice heavy with defeat, but it's something. Plonk snatched the claw, holding it up to the light. This will be enough. We'll analyze its genetic structure, find its weaknesses, and learn nothing, Sark AI Azam interrupted, because if I'm reading the scans correctly, their genetic structure is so efficient it makes you look like an evolutionary accident. Plunk's bioluminescence flickered violently. Enough, Sark. I will not be mocked by a glorified calculator. The AI's chuckle was infuriatingly calm. Mocking you isn't my programming. It's just a bonus. As the shuttle docked with the taxonomic triumph, Plonks began planning his next move, his mind a storm of denial and desperation. But deep down, a small, unwelcome thought nagged at him. Maybe, just maybe, he had met his match. In the jungle below, the Komodo dragons watched the shuttle disappear into the sky. The scarred leader turned to its pack, letting out a low growl that seemed to carry an unspoken command. The others responded with a chorus of guttural roars, their eyes reflecting a quiet, cunning intelligence. Whatever the aliens had planned, the dragons would be ready.